"You didn't offend me," he said calmly. "You just removed yourselves from the game. No shouting, no slammed fists. Just a few minutes later, the entire conference, from top investors to the operations team, quietly walked out of the five-star hotel that had just shown prejudice toward the very man who created the event. No objections, no explanations, and the most powerful thing was the absence, because in a world where people often see you through the lens of their bias, sometimes the boldest act is not staying just to prove your worth. If you've ever walked into a room and felt judged before you even spoke, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to follow the powerful journey of a man who chose to walk away and made the world follow him. Now let's begin the story of Brandon Ellis. He appeared in a tailored suit, ready to lead the biggest tech conference of the year. But the hotel staff looked him up and down and casually said, "Please wait outside." What happened next would shake the entire company. It was nearly 8 in the morning when Brandon Ellis stepped out of a black Lincoln Continental in front of the circular driveway of the Grandcourt Hotel, a luxurious building in the heart of Lakeshore City. He adjusted the sleeve of his navy blue suit, the high-end fabric catching the morning light. Everything he wore, from the crisp white shirt to the gleaming Italian leather shoes, exuded precision and purpose. But the valet didn't approach him. Brandon held his keys, loosely looking toward the young man, who instead pretended to check his phone and turned to the car behind. "Can you handle this one for me?" he said to his colleague without so much as a glance at Brandon. Brandon looked at the hotel's glass door. No big signage, no red carpet, just clean glass and a quiet lobby. Nothing about it hinted at what was about to unfold. He slid the keys back into his pocket, parked the car himself, and returned to the main entrance. When he opened the door, the receptionist's smile flickered, then vanished. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "Good morning. I'm here for the Summit Tech Conference. I believe the Cedar Room has been booked for us." She glanced at him, frowned, then turned to her screen. "Are you with one of the vendors?" "No, I'm the executive director." A blink. "Well, could you wait outside for a moment? We're still setting up." Brandon paused. "I'm also the opening speaker." No apology, no sign of surprise. Just a strained smile and a curt, "We're not ready yet. Please wait outside." Another staff member, a young man in a blazer with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, approached from behind. He sized Brandon up as if looking for an access badge. "Are you with security?" he asked in a low voice. "I'm Brandon Ellis," he answered calmly. "The conference you're hosting today, I'm the one in charge of it." A brief silence. Then the staffer pointed to the door. "Please wait outside for a bit. Someone will come to get you." Brandon exhaled lightly through his nose, slowly. Guests had begun arriving. A white investor in a gray suit walked in, greeted with handshakes and warm smiles. No one asked him to wait. Brandon caught his eye, but the man merely glanced at him and entered the lobby, escorted by the very staff who had asked Brandon to leave. The glass door whispered shut behind him. Now he stood outside again on the sidewalk, checking his watch. 8:09 a.m. His speech was in 51 minutes. Still time. But inside him, something stirred. Not anger, but something colder. Across the street, a mother pushed a stroller toward a coffee shop. A bus screeched to a stop. Life went on. And Brandon, who had built an entire company from nothing, was being treated as if he didn't belong, simply because he didn't look the way they expected. The phone in his pocket buzzed, boss, came the familiar voice of Miles, his assistant. "Did they welcome you yet?" Brandon stared at the glass door. His voice was even. Not exactly. That was when everything changed. Not with them, but with him. "What do you mean? Not exactly?" "They told me to wait outside." A pause. Not surprise, not even anger, just silence. Miles had worked with Brandon long enough to understand when his boss spoke, in that tone he was documenting everything, not to complain, but to remember. "Want me to come down? No stay with the investors. They'll arrive in 15 minutes. I'll handle it." He hung up, adjusted his tie, and stepped back into the lobby. The receptionist saw him return, but her expression didn't change. "I believe I told you to wait outside," she said, typing something into her keyboard. "And I did," he replied. "Now I'd like to speak with the event coordinator. I'm Brandon Ellis, founder and CEO of Ellis Innovations. We've booked the Cedar Room and 2 full floors of accommodations for this conference." Now she looked him in the eye, but still no apology. Only a skeptical stare, as if gauging whether this was some sort of prank. "What did you say?" "Your name was Ellison Ellis." She turned to the young man in the blazer. "Call Natalie from events, please." He nodded and walked away. Just then, a bellhop pushed a cart piled with document cases across the lobby. Brandon stepped aside and noticed 2 of his executive board members emerging from the elevator, both wearing visible conference badges on their suits. A hotel manager welcomed them with enthusiasm, as if he'd materialized out of thin air. Brandon raised his hand slightly to catch his attention, but the manager merely glanced at him and turned away. "Miss," he said to the receptionist, his tone calm. "I'll say this once more. I'm not a hotel guest. I'm not with security. I'm not making a delivery. I am the reason they're all here. I'm organizing this conference. I brought 60 top investors from the West Coast to this building this morning." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the young man returned with the walkie-talkie. "Ms. Natalie is on her way." Then, after a moment of hesitation, he asked, "Are you really the CEO?" Brandon offered a faint smile. "I didn't just build this company. I funded it myself. I wrote the first lines of code. I signed the hotel contract, and I chose this location because I believed in its professionalism." Both of them stared at him. He went on, "I manage $5 billion, and I almost trusted this event to you." The silence that followed was no longer skepticism. It was confusion. The receptionist began to waver, but before she could respond, Natalie, the event coordinator, hurried into the lobby with a folder in hand. "Brandon Ellis. I truly apologize for the delay. We weren't notified you had arrived. Please come with me. The Cedar Room is ready, and the coffee is set. The investors are starting to gather." The staff who had asked him to wait outside now stepped aside like parting water. Brandon followed Natalie past the front desk, past the young man with the walkie-talkie, and the receptionist whose face had flushed, whether from shame or something else was unclear. But Brandon said nothing more. He didn't need to, because what they failed to realize was not that a man was trying to sneak into a place he didn't belong, but that the man who owned that space had simply stood still. Given them a chance to correct their mistake, they didn't. But what followed wouldn't be a lesson in anger. It would be a lesson in memory. And Brandon Ellis had an excellent memory. The Cedar Room lay deep within the hotel's conference wing, past carpeted hallways and abstract paintings. Inside, the lights were dimmed for the opening remarks. Chairs were arranged in perfect rows. The podium bore the Summit Tech logo, and side tables were stocked with bottled water and polished nameplates. Brandon scanned the room. Up front, Miles was working with the sound technician, checking microphones and levels. Investors trickled in chatting quietly over coffee. No one knew what had just occurred in the lobby. Brandon didn't step up to the podium. Not yet. Instead, he turned into a small side room, the speaker's lounge, and gently closed the door behind him. He took out his phone. "Harper," he said, his voice low. On the other end, Harper, Chief Operating Officer of Ellis Innovations, picked up immediately. "We're moving the conference." Not a trace of surprise. Harper was used to that tone. "Today. You want to move nearly 50 people with less than an hour until kickoff." "Not want, need," Brandon replied firmly. "You want me to call Claiborne or Langston?" "Langston," he said, "move all the investors there. Make it clear this isn't a scheduling change. It's a matter of principle. I'll explain once things are in place." "Understood," Harper said. "What about the rooms we booked here? Cancel them all. If they refuse to refund, charge it to my personal account." No negotiation. Harper let out a slow sigh. "Got it. I'll call Miles, have him delay the opening and start moving people." Brandon hung up. No anger. No raised voice. Just action, decisive and clear. He looked at the dark glass pane of the speaker lounge door. No pride, no sense of victory. Just fatigue, the kind worn by a man who has walked into too many rooms where the first glance always dismisses him. A gentle knock came. It was Miles. "Want to review the slides one last time?" Brandon shook his head. "Change of plans." Miles raised an eyebrow. "We're leaving. I already made the call." It took his assistant a second to catch on. Then he nodded subtly. "They didn't even try to make it right, did they?" "No. You want me to notify the board? I'll speak to them myself. You just help coordinate the move and make sure no one thanks this hotel." Within minutes, Miles was quietly spreading the word. Handshakes, discreet nods. "We're changing venues," he whispered to a group. "The new place is better. Just a few blocks away. Mr. Ellis will explain everything." Meanwhile, Harper called the Langston Grand, arranged the alternate location, mobilized staff, transferred AV equipment, and coordinated with the lunch catering team. Everything moved like a well-oiled machine. Brandon returned to the Cedar Room once, just to grab his laptop and documents. At that moment, a hotel manager appeared. His face was tense, a folder in hand. "Mr. Ellis, I understand there was a misunderstanding in the lobby this morning. I personally apologize. There was no intent to offend." "You didn't offend me," Brandon replied calmly. "You removed yourselves from the table. Is there anything we can do to make this right?" Brandon zipped his laptop bag and looked him in the eye. "The opportunity has passed. No need to raise his voice, no threats. Because sometimes what speaks louder than outrage is absence." The room that had been packed with investors was now gradually emptying. Brandon walked through the lobby one last time. The very place he'd been asked to leave. The same receptionist stood at her post, lips pressed tight. The man with the walkie-talkie was nowhere to be seen. Brandon didn't stop. A black SUV was waiting outside. The driver opened the door. He got in just as his phone started vibrating. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of others, finally realizing, by the time the first croissants were brought into the Cedar Room, most of the guests were already several blocks away, in the sunlit grand hall of the Langston Grand, the second most luxurious hotel in Lakeshire. Here no one needed to know who he was. They welcomed him, as if they'd been expecting him all along. Back at the Grandcourt, the front desk fell into confusion. The receptionist repeatedly checked her screen, scanned the guest list, and reviewed the room bookings. Frowning, she called out, "Natalie, the conference guests are leaving." Natalie, the event coordinator, was in the back hall helping the AV team pack up equipment. "What do you mean, leaving? I mean, they're checking out." Some didn't say a word, just walked out. One said, "They wouldn't be paying for lunch today. Tell them to speak with Mr. Ellis." Someone else chimed in. A security guard approached the manager. The SUV outside just took him and a few others. The change came quietly, like a domino effect. No shouting, no arguments, just disappearance. Meanwhile, at Langston, Brandon stood before the large screen in the bright, airy conference hall. He began to speak clearly, calmly, without a hint of bitterness. "Before we begin, I want to thank you all for your flexibility. I know a last-minute venue change is not ideal, but I believe the place we choose to gather says a lot about what we value." A soft murmur of agreement filled the room. I originally chose the other hotel for its reputation, its service, and its proximity to your offices. But this morning I realized glossy lobbies and 5 stars don't guarantee respect. He paused. I was asked to wait outside twice by staff who never asked my name. I parked my own car. I reintroduced myself. But in that space, none of it mattered. Some faces grew still. A few heads shook. Others remained quiet. Not surprised, but I don't believe in yelling. I don't believe in dragging others down just to prove our worth. I believe in moving forward to places that hear us, see us, and value the work we bring. Applause rang out not from pity, but from respect. At the back of the room, Miles stood with arms crossed, his gaze quietly proud. Back at the Grandcourt, the conference signs were being taken down. Staff cleared tables, wheeled away untouched coffee carts. The kitchen crew stood silently, unsure whether to dismantle the lunch spread. The hotel manager stared at the document in his hands. A contract termination notice from Ellis Innovations. No lawsuit, no threats, just a clear end with a heavy cost. He called the general manager. We lost the event. Why? Because the guest we didn't recognize was the event. The afternoon light spilled across the street, casting long shadows. In the quiet moving SUV, Brandon sat in the back, his suit jacket folded beside him, the top button of his shirt undone, his face marked with fatigue. Miles sat next to him, scrolling through emails on a tablet. "You sure you don't want me to draft a public statement?" he asked. "People are already posting. Someone from Newton and Pierce caught footage of you walking out of the hotel." Brandon shook his head. "Let them talk. I don't need to be the center of attention." He leaned back against the seat. The engine hummed softly. Outside, children rode bikes laughing. A woman helped her elderly father out of a rideshare, guiding him into a small clinic near the corner. Nothing remarkable. Life went on, but inside the car there was a deep, resounding silence. A woman in a red coat was helping her father out of a rideshare vehicle, slowly making their way toward the dental clinic on the corner. Outside, life continued as usual, unremarkable and steady. But inside the black SUV, the air was completely still. "Can I ask you something?" Noel said softly, eyes still fixed on the tablet screen. "Go ahead," Brandon replied without turning. "Why didn't you blow up at them? They deserved it after everything." Brandon was silent. He stared out the car window, his gaze distant. After a while, he spoke slowly. "When I was 19, I went to interview at a startup. I had a resume full of summer jobs, great grades. I thought that would be enough to open my first door, but the receptionist asked if I was the food delivery guy. I just laughed and said no. Then I sat for 2 hours. The interview never happened. They forgot I was even there. Noel turned to look at his boss, saying nothing. I could have made a scene, raised hell, but I didn't. I walked away and found another door. Then another. Brandon rubbed his hands together slightly, as if remembering how they used to grip the steering wheel during those early years. The thing is, I used to think if I got good enough, got the degrees, the money, the tailored suits, then no one would ever judge me by the way. I looked again. He turned to Noel, gaze sharp yet calm. Nope. Noel nodded gently, but this time it wasn't just a receptionist. It was an entire hotel, an entire event. Exactly, Brandon said. That's why I walked away. Not because I needed to prove something, but because I wanted the people watching to understand. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to kneel. For respect you already deserve. He exhaled, still looking out at the street. My father once told me, you can't make someone see you, but you can choose not to stay where you're ignored. Noel leaned back in his seat, letting the words settle into the quiet red light. At the intersection up ahead, a vivid billboard flashed images of young faces from a startup show. Bold logos, modern colors. Noel smiled. Did you ever think we'd be the ones running those programs instead of applying to them? Brandon squinted and smiled softly every day. But it still feels strange sometimes. The SUV pulled up in front of the glass and steel headquarters of Ellis Innovations, quiet, composed, just like the man himself. They stepped out. The front desk receptionist smiled and held the elevator. As they rode up, Noel spoke again. Have you ever thought of telling the story of that 19-year-old? Maybe Brandon said not to get sympathy, but to shed light, because people think those moments are just accidents. A bad day, a rude person. But no, it's a system, repeating itself, then getting buried. They stepped off the elevator, Brandon carrying his briefcase. He continued, you can't fix something. People won't even name, but you can show them how to walk away from it with your dignity intact. What Brandon didn't expect was how far his quiet decision would travel. It started with whispers in boardrooms, then a few discreet emails. Within days, 3 other companies had quietly canceled their contracts with the Grandcourt Hotel. No announcements, no drama, just a single line. We've decided to go in a different direction. But behind closed doors, the message was clear. Did you hear Ellis's team pulled out? Yeah, we don't want to be associated with that kind of risk. What's our backup venue? The hotel scrambled to do damage control. A regional sales director reached out to Ellis Innovations with an offer next quarter's conference. Free of charge, complimentary VIP suites, even spa vouchers for investors. The email never made it past Harper. She read it, marked it, handled no reply from Brandon. Because when trust breaks, it can't be patched with perks. It's not a bill in error. It's a failure that happened right in front of them. Meanwhile, word of the venue change spread to media circles. An independent tech journal published a piece. Not a critique, just a timeline. What happened, who saw it, the shift in location, and the polite but firm silence that followed. That article landed in inboxes, then group chats, then became the subject of weekend gatherings. There, young professionals of color raised their glasses to Brandon Ellis, not because he lashed out, but because he didn't have to. Because sometimes the boldest move isn't slamming the door. It's walking out of the room as if it was never worthy of your presence. At the Ellis Innovations office, the boardroom was quiet. Brandon sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 4 senior staff and 3 partners from a private equity firm in Redmond. One investor spoke up. "We heard about the venue change. People are still talking about it." Brandon tilted slightly. "Does that concern you?" "Not at all," the man replied. "In fact, it told us more about your leadership than any business plan could." Another investor nodded. "Very few people maintain that kind of composure under pressure. That's what builds trust." Brandon nodded modestly. Not with pride, because to him, this was never about winning or losing. It was about refusing to play by a rigged set of rules. That evening, he walked the quiet hallway of the office. A large whiteboard came into view covered in diagrams, sticky notes, and handwritten formulas. Noel sat there sipping from a chipped ceramic mug. "You saw the article, right?" he asked. "I did." "They left out the part where the receptionist didn't greet me," Brandon smiled. "They always leave something out." Noel said, "But that's fine. The people who need to know, they know what happened." Brandon looked at the whiteboard again, eyes pausing on a sentence written in red marker. "Everyone must feel seen." "Remember," he said, "when we built this office, I didn't want it too flashy. I didn't need people to walk in and be wowed. I just wanted them to feel acknowledged." Noel nodded. "They saw you?" "No," Brandon said quietly. "They always saw me. They just never thought I was the one signing the checks." He turned off the lights and paused at the doorway. "Let's keep going," he said. But before the night was over, there was still one more person he needed to meet. Someone who reminded him why moments like today mattered so much. The next morning, Brandon stood in front of the tall window in his office, holding a fresh cup of black coffee. The sky outside was silver gray, a still canvas for distant thoughts. A soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said without turning. The door opened. A young man stepped in Bright Eye's posture, still slightly unsure. Logan Brooks, a new analyst at Ellis Innovations, about 25 years old, held a folder but seemed hesitant. "You asked to see me." Logan said. Brandon gave a small nod and gestured to the chair across from him. Logan sat down, folder resting on his lap, but unopened. His eyes wandered off to the side, unsure how to begin. Heard what happened at the hotel. He finally said, "We were all talking about it over lunch yesterday." Brandon didn't respond right away. He let the silence settle, not heavy, just long enough to let the unspoken become clearer. "I just wanted to ask, how did you stay calm when everything was so clearly wrong?" Brandon smiled slightly. "You think I was calm?" Logan looked confused. "Weren't you?" "No," Brandon said. "I just didn't let them see it." He set his coffee cup down on the desk and continued. "You know what they saw when I walked into that hotel? Someone who didn't belong there." "Exactly. Not the contracts, not the event, not what I've built. Just someone they didn't expect to be in that space." Logan leaned forward. "So why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you confront them? Make a scene so the whole world could see?" Logan asked, eyes still burning with second-hand anger. "Because the world already saw." Brandon replied, "The issue isn't that people don't know. The issue is we need to show those coming after us that we don't need permission to exist. We don't need acceptance to be present." Logan gave a small nod, silent. "Now, you handled this really calmly," he said. "If it were me, I wouldn't have known what to do." That's exactly what you need to remember, Brandon said evenly. You don't need to know how to respond ahead of time. You just need to remember this: never trade your composure for someone else's ignorance. He leaned back slightly in his chair, then looked directly at Logan. If they misjudge you, let them. But make sure that the space you build your company, your name, your team, never makes anyone else feel like they don't belong. Logan leaned back as well, the words heavier than he expected. His eyes dimmed, not from hurt, but from awakening. That's what leadership is, Brandon said. It's not breaking down the wall. It's building a door somewhere else. They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then Brandon leaned forward and tapped lightly on the folder Logan had brought in. "What's in here?" "Oh, right." Logan snapped back to work mode. The updated proposal from the behavioral data team. "We made the revisions you suggested last week." Brandon opened the folder and flipped through the first few pages, scanning the lines quickly. "Good," he said simply. "Let's meet with the full team this afternoon to go over it." Logan stood up, but before reaching the door, he turned around. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For showing us how to move forward without bowing our heads." Brandon gave him a small nod. Logan stepped out. The door closed behind him. Outside traffic kept moving. The city buzzed as if nothing had happened, but those who had witnessed it, they wouldn't forget. Because this was never just about one man and one hotel. It was about all the rooms people enter where first glances only see half the story. It was about how true power can be shown, not with loud reactions, but with quiet, deliberate action. And it was about rewriting the rules without ever picking up the pen they handed you. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to fight back to prove you belong. Because the way you choose silence at the right moment, walk away with your head held high and never trade your dignity, that is true strength. Brandon Ellis didn't leave the hotel out of pride. He left because he understood one thing. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you have the right to carry with you, or take away when others no longer deserve it. And today's story isn't just about one man who was underestimated. It's about all of us who've ever walked into a space and quietly wondered, am I truly being seen? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and share how it made you feel. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss more stories that inspire, empower, and go deeper than words. See you in the next video where power doesn't lie in the shout, but in the calm.